My name is Ben Turney. I'm the CEO of Kavango Resources. Kavango is a Southern African metal exploration company with projects in Botswana and Zimbabwe. Today, I'm joined with Dave Catterall, who is leading our KCB, that's in the Kalahari Copperbelt, our Kalahari Copperbelt exploration strategy.
Ben, thank you very much for the introduction. Good to see you again. The last time we saw each other, we were actually sitting on the same side of the table, so to speak, at an investor conference in London. But here we are, kind of pretty much a year on. Terrible markets for the junior space. Quite a lot going on in the company. You've been working on a Botswanan portfolio for a number of years. You've just added a Zimbabwean kind of portfolio as well, and you've just announced a capital raise. Could you just kind of give us a little bit of an overview about how the new portfolio in Zimbabwe came in?
Absolutely. So I was first introduced to an exploration geologist called Steve Smith about 4 years ago. And Steve spent 3 years trying to persuade me to look at various projects in Zimbabwe. And as part of my job, as you know, Merlin, from when we met at that event, I do a lot of networking with investors looking to try and bring opportunities into the company. And when I first started talking to Steve, this was back in 2019, there was no interest really in investing in Zimbabwe at all. You know, I did mention it to other investors, and it was clear that it was a closed door at that point. Now, over the last 4 years, we've seen significant improvement in the metals space, so in the metal for metal prices. And while you're right, at the moment things are very difficult in the junior market, I actually think that creates enormous opportunity, because if we look at the long-term projections, both for base and precious metals, I think the current pricing discrepancy between junior exploration and the metal prices will actually close in the favour of the junior exploration market. Now, what we've also seen in parallel to that, as metal prices have improved, and there's also been, I think, quite a late recognition of the influence that the Chinese have had in this market. So the Chinese went on a huge buying spree starting in the mid-2000s and which goes on today, where they've pretty much hoovered up most of the world's development projects. And I think a lot of us in the more, let's call it, advanced economies have been behind the curve on this, and people really haven't woken up just to quite how much of a march the Chinese have stolen on everybody. So there's also been an increasing interest in my time as CEO of Kavango over the last 2 years in exploration as well. Now, in talking with Steve, I've always been very impressed with his vision and his knowledge, in particular of the Matabeleland gold fields in southern Zimbabwe. Steve has spent 15 years here through incredibly difficult economic times, trying to get projects off the ground. But he's also, during that time, accumulated an incredible in-depth knowledge of the geology of the region, various individual projects, and where to go prospecting. So it's always been fantastic to talk to Steve, and he's been on hand to provide me with guidance. He used to be very senior at Anglo American, so he was involved heavily in their exploration program. So he's a guy with a real track record or pedigree. But over the intervening period, what I noticed started to happen was a softening of attitudes towards investing in Zimbabwe, which took us up to last August when I first came to this country. Now, at that point, I've noticed, as I say, like, there were people who were increasingly interested in Zim, and I find that today. A lot is known about the geological potential here, a lot is known about the economic potential. It's a very, very exciting province for exploration geologists to work. But of course, the jurisdictional risk is what scares a lot of people away. So while there have been a lot of people who are interested in the country, and I do believe there's quite a lot of money on the sidelines waiting to move into Zimbabwe, no one wants to go first. It's been a case of after you, let's see how things work out with you. So I talked to the board last summer about the potential for moving into Zim. We've got our historic connection with Zimbabwe through Hilary Gumbo, who's one of our co-founders and one of our PLC directors. So we've already had a connection to Zimbabwe as a company. But from August to December last year, we weighed up the possibility of coming into the country. And it was really from February and March this year, 2023, that we conducted 2 field visits. I came down on a scouting visit to come and see some of the projects specifically. Then in March, I was joined by my fellow directors, Peter Winterby, Brett Grist and Hilary, and we went to look at the first project, which we took on in June.
Thanks for the background. I mean, the Botswanan copper projects you've got, are essentially early stage exploration in a new frontier. And what I know about the Zimbabwean greenstone belts is that there's normally an old operation there. These are high-grade targets. I can see from your news releases that your PLs are kind of clustered around existing or old operations. Is this, this is a kind of a very different model. This is a kind of a high-grade target, gold target. It's a different beast to the copper exploration model that you've been pursuing in Botswana. When you look going forwards, you've got gold, you've got high-grade gold targets and large-scale copper targets. What's going to be the split of your budget and your work program over the next 12 months, say?
So the split of our work program and budget is roughly 50-50. You're quite right. So our project in Botswana is still more greenfield, more conceptual. And that's been part of the challenge that we as a business have faced. Our historic exploration to date has been an extremely challenging terrain with a lot of sand cover, a lot of sediment cover, primarily geophysics led. This is very expensive, very high risk exploration. And while we feel very confident about the potential in the KCB, particularly now that we're working with Dave, who'll talk a bit about his background and the project's potential in a moment, he's a far better position to emphasise the sort of what it is we're so excited about in the KCB. In Zimbabwe, we're actually following a slightly different strategy, Merlin. It's interesting that you've picked up on the high grade potential. So Zimbabwe has a reputation for having a very large number, over 4,000 registered mines, most of which are chasing high-grade veins from surface. But I think what a lot of people haven't really grasped yet about Zimbabwe is if you look back to the early 1980s, 1982 specifically, in that year, Zimbabwe produced more gold than Australia. If you look at the geological setting of the Zimbabwe, particularly in the south of the country, the Zimbabwean goldfields, these gold belts, and you look at the geological similarities with some of the goldfields in Western Australia, from the mid-1980s onwards, where Zimbabwe experienced quite a lot of trouble post-independence or post-black majority rule, the country went through a very troubled time, which hindered the development of the mining space. What you had in Australia was the bulk mining boom. So where in 40 odd years ago, Australia had lots of these historic high-grade producers and high-grade veins, what nobody had really looked at was the potential for bulk mining, so the material that ran in between these parallel reefs. It's our belief that a similar opportunity exists in Zimbabwe today. So the targets we're actually looking for now are not so much on the high grade. We're looking for lower grade, bulk mineable, ideally nearer surface opportunities. And that for us is what we think is the sweet spot. It's underexplored, and there is a great deal of opportunity in this country for us to pursue.
And is the kind of the ownership structure likely to be the kind of 50% owned by government? Is that what you're kind of ultimately going to be heading towards? What's the name of the other Zimbabwean gold producing company?
No, so they don't have those sorts of rules anymore. There was an attempt at indigenization, and again, this is part of Zimbabwe's challenge as far as I can see. I've spent a lot of time on the ground here over the last year, and just from my personal experience, there's a lot that we think we know about Zimbabwe back home from where we've been influenced by the media and by the statistics. If you actually come and spend time in this country, the reality on the ground is very, very different. It's certainly a very challenging environment to operate in. We're under no illusions. This is why I'm planning on moving here full-time from January. We need to have strong leadership on the ground. But the ownership structure in this country, it's actually fascinating. So they have a historic legacy of what they call gold claims. These are 10-hectare blocks. And the original idea of this was pre-independence, of these gold claims was to give ordinary people the opportunity to peg a gold claim and then mine it themselves. Now, these gold claims are still in existence today, and people are mining from these individual claims. The trick is, or the challenge at the moment, is to find enough of these claims that have been stitched together in a contiguous block, potentially on top of an ore body that lends itself towards bulk mining. So that's what we're looking for. We've got a very specific profile of project that we're looking for. The situation in Zimbabwe is also complicated by what they call EPOs, which are exclusive permitting orders. Now, these are like a more widespread prospecting license, similar to what we would have in Zimbabwe, Now, the EPO situation in Zimbabwe is fairly obscure. There's quite a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of EPOs that have been pegged, but the actual process itself, a bit of work is needed to bring it up to a level that would enable international firms to come and start working with more of these EPOs. So what Kavango is looking for are gold claims that are stitched together in contiguous blocks that have security of tenure, so sort of ownership dating back 20 plus years, and have the potential for hosting untested bulk mineable opportunities.
So really a measure of success, over the course of the next year will be indications of continuous gold mineralization at surface in the first instance through geochemistry and probably trenching, because what you're looking for is a bulk tonnage. You'll be looking for some kind of width and strike extent at the surface, and then probably moving into drilling at a later stage. Is that kind of a fair approach to how you'd be measuring success?
We've hit the ground much harder and much faster than that. This is not an environment to hang around in. So we're actually mobilizing our first drill rig as we speak. We're getting it over the border from South Africa. We signed our first option less than 3 months ago, Merlin, and we're due to start drilling on October the 9th. So we're getting straight into diamond drilling. I talked a little earlier about all the work that Steve has done over the last 15 years. What Steve and the local artisanal and small-scale contract miners have done for us is a lot of the scouting. We can see where the gold is because these guys are not pulling, all that tonnage out of the ground for their health. They're using old technology, they're using hand picks essentially. So we know where the high-grade gold is. In turn, what that's showing us is where we believe the reefs are. And then what we're looking to do is to drill to test what occurs between those reefs. Hasn't been done before in the projects that we're looking at. So we're moving immediately into drilling in about 2 weeks' time. Okay,
good. That will be providing an interesting kind of suite of news releases, which will be interesting to keep an eye on. Jumping to Botswana now. I can't help, when I look back through your news releases, one of the things you've done is you've focused on the Karakubis project area, having spent quite a lot of time and effort on the Kalahari Sutra Zone project. And in one of your CEO statements, you said, we've learned valuable lessons. I think it was on the back of hole number 3, which was 606 meters long, but didn't kind of give much by way of grade, but it was drilling a geophysics anomaly. Could you tell me what those lessons are? What have you learned from that exercise?
Well, I think the primary lesson that we've learned is that we need some success. We need some geological success. We need to demonstrate to the market that our team can actually find metal. I think with the Kalahari Sutra Zone project, it's by no means dead. We are looking at a number of options for what we can do to resuscitate this next year. But what we've recognised that in terms of our budgets and the financing that we now have behind us, we've had to take a look at our portfolio and be very honest with ourselves about where we think we can deliver success in the nearer term. When Kavango originally listed back in 2018, it was on the basis of the Kalahari Sutra Zone. That did attract a lot of shareholders and a lot of interest in. So we've given that project our best go, and there is still plenty to go at within that project area. But the reality is it's a very expensive, extremely high-risk form of exploration. It was that recognition that was sort of behind part of the rationale why we came into Zimbabwe in the first place. So where in Botswana we've got an extremely stable jurisdiction with a long established track record of commercial transactions taking place unimpeded. In Zimbabwe, the jurisdiction is much riskier. It's a much more challenging environment to work in. However, in Botswana, because of the presence of these Kalahari sands, where the geology is obscured from view and a lot of exploration methods just simply don't work in Bots because of the amount of cover, the exploration terrain there is much riskier. In Zimbabwe, we've got the metal at surface. We've got the metal at surface being dug up economically, which is what's keeping this country going. There are no form of capital markets in Zimbabwe at the moment. Everything that's happening in Bulawayo, the town that I'm in at the moment, which really is quite surprising to visitors when you actually visit this town, just quite how much economic activity there is and signs of a growing, developing middle class, the cars that you see on the streets, the products that you see in the shops, the restaurants that you see, full of people who are out entertaining. There really is a lot happening here that I think a lot of people would be very surprised about, and that has largely all stemmed from the gold that's being pulled out of the ground by hand. So where I think one of the main lessons that we've learned, Merlin, is that we've got to get some runs on the board now. So our focus over the next 18 months in Botswana, we're looking to develop our projects that we might be able then to sell them. In Zimbabwe, we're looking for projects that we can take through exploration into mining ourselves. So it's a slightly different strategy, but again, based on our experience to date in Bots.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting that you say you can develop the projects in Botswana potentially to sell, or presumably in that mix, there's kind of partnership. If you've got good land tenure and you can get a carried position, there's a kind of strategic approach that you could look at there.
Yes.
But in order to do that, you've got to improve them, advance them, make them sexier, get more data, get more information, get some, I think the phrase you used was runs on the board, show that the team can hit metal. Dave's been sitting there very patiently and very quietly. What's different about Karakubis? Surely it's still difficult exploration. There's still sand cover and you're still reliant on geophysics. What's different about Karakubis to the Kalahari Suture Zone?
I think essentially the Kalahari Suture Zone was always a very good conceptual target. The problem is it's going to be deep and geophysically led. So even if you find targets, when you come to drill them, you're looking at very deep holes. And you can burn through a lot of money on a deep drilling program and not get to where you need to get to. So when we were talking to Ben, we looked at the rationale of how much money you were spending on drilling in KSZ versus for the same amount of money, you could drill a lot more holes on the KCB. And believe it or not, there are areas within Botswana where the sand cover isn't that thick. And traditionally, most of the exploration work has been done north along the belt around Kumatau Zone 5, where DML used to operate, and it branched down towards the southwest and had a lot of success with Samfire's discovery of Mateo. But if you go further southwest along the belt, there are areas with sand and areas without sand. And one of the things that we've managed to do with Kavango is they've consolidated not only their own land, but they've now done this deal with ENIG Elements and consolidated a much bigger package of land, which gives us a large target area to work on. And interestingly enough, the sand cover there is only a few meters with maybe 10 to 15 meters of calcrete, and it's directly along strike from Samfire's Mateo deposit. When we've done initial sample recovery and mapping in the field and mapping of water borehole chips, we've compiled quite a detailed map now that we actually believe confirms the geophysical interpretation that we've done that contradicts some of the original mapping done in the 80s and 90s by the Botswana Geological Survey. So we feel we've identified certain stratigraphy that is normally conducive to hosting mineralization that's directly along strike from Samfire. So here's the two-phase of stroke. We want to try and develop that target into something, and if we can actually prove there's metal in the ground, because we've now got a larger tenement package, it will make it a lot more interesting to either Samfire or another player. Because as we've seen with the recent acquisition of Kumatau, there's an awful lot of interest out there. It started off with maybe two big players putting in a bid for Kumatau, and at one stage it was up to 30 people, 30 companies. So we don't feel that we're out of the park here. It's very good ground. We've managed to consolidate not only our land package, but with another land package. They're both directly along strike from Mateo. Historically, there was some drilling work done by ENRG. We've also been mapping the drill chips, and we've managed to find pathfinder metals. We've actually intersected pyrite, little bits of chalcopyrite, galena, sphalerite. The lithologies that we're drilling are consistent with the lower Dakar, which is associated with most of the mineralization along the belt. So we feel that we're in a very confident position to find something within that new land package. And at the moment, we're compiling a whole set of new maps, which we'll be publishing in due course. And I think once the market sees the new mapping and the prospectivity that we've got, I think it'll add a lot of value to what we're trying to do.
Did the IP survey that you started in late July, did that help?
Yes, it has. One of the problems you still have in Botswana is that unless the mineralization comes to surface like it does at Zone 5, where, well, it's underneath sand, but it interacts with the overburden. If you're looking for something like Sandfire have, then you're looking for something that's a little bit harder to find because the mineralization actually isn't exposed. It's all hidden or occluded. So the only way to find those, even at shallow depth, is with geophysics. And we've learned from some of the geophysics that Sandfire have done and that we've replicated. And also with the ground, so we've done airborne AEM, we've done airborne magnetics, we've also done some airborne gravity. And they've highlighted the same sorts of structural targets and trap sites where we feel are favourable for hosting mineralisation. So by doing the IP surveys, it's to try and raise our ability to pick which trap site structures are going to host sulfide mineralisation versus which ones are mainly hosting hydrothermal alteration but not actually sulfide metals. So that's why we did the IP survey.
So if I understand it correctly, you've done the kind of the regional survey to give you the kind of the architecture of the folds and the structure, to give you some potential target areas, and you've done a little bit of kind of resolution work through the IP to better understand the nature of those kind of to rank those those preferential areas. And does that mean that what happens next is the drill phase? I mean, are you ready for drilling? Or is there more vectoring to do?
Well, it's a two-stage process. You see, we think we've got far enough on some of the smaller areas because we, as you quite rightly say, we were doing orientation work. We wanted to make sure that the geochemistry and the IP were telling us the same thing. Now that we know that's working, we need to carry that out over the larger group area that we've now consolidated. But at the same time, we're confident enough that the work we've done will put us into something fairly soon. So the stage is set now. We want to try and get to drilling on some of the detailed areas in Q1 next year, while we bring up the rest of the licensed tenement area up to the same level of detail. Once we get that up to the same level of detail as where we are on the orientation, then we'll expand drilling there, and we hope to be doing drilling there Q2, Q3 next year.
Okay, but you've got to do the geophysics first on those areas. This all sounds really exciting, but also quite expensive. Ben, you've just announced a financing this morning. In June you talked about doing in June you did a 1.4 million pound capital raise. You also spoke about doing a 4.6 investment with Pure Bond, and then today you announced that you're putting out the papers to go ahead with the capital raise with the whitewash, so that presumably that includes the Pure Bond group as another strategic as a potential kind of major shareholder going forward. Could you just talk about the financing plans, please, and the current balance sheet and the current makeup of the shareholder register?
So the whitewash is for the Pure Bond investment, you're correct. Assuming that shareholders vote in favour and support the whitewash proposal, the prospectus will then complete a week after, and Pure Bond will become 52% shareholders in Kavango. Now, we've obviously gone through a very lengthy, really quite rigorous, very difficult process with the takeover panel, making sure, going through sort of various issues relating to concert parties, and they really have done a very, very thorough job. So Pure Bond has indicated their very strong support for the company. They've also indicated that assuming that we're successful and we do a good job with their money now, they are there in the background to continue supporting the company financially. Now, we also have some other opportunities that we're looking at for direct project financing, so financing at the project level, both locally in Botswana and also locally in Zimbabwe. This is something that I've been working on over the last 8 months. So we have a lot of options that are open to us. I think one of the things that set Kavango apart from a lot of our competitors is a lot of our peers tend to rely on the traditional broker-led placing. And to my mind, that model is broken at the moment. In this market, with liquidity as it is, it's near impossible. Companies are gasping to raise money. So we've taken a very different approach where we've actually gone out directly to engage with investors ourselves. And this was how we were able to attract Pure Bond in, because if you look at Kavango on paper in one way, you can see the company has spent quite a lot of money on its exploration to date and hasn't found anything yet. But despite that, what we have done is we've continuously strengthened our team. We've improved our knowledge and our understanding of the markets. We've taken quite a bold step coming into Zimbabwe as well. So there is a lot that's happening within this business. We just haven't yet made that crucial discovery. So I'm very confident in the relationship with Pure Bond. They've been extremely supportive through this really quite torturous at times process, getting the financing up to this stage. We've had to ask them a lot of questions, and these are very busy guys. They're worth
who is Pure Bond?
So it's the Consagra family. The Consagra family is a family of ultra high net worths with a variety of different business interests, a lot of which are in Africa. They've been involved in some mining projects in the past, but only on a fairly loose basis. They were introduced through Peter Winterby, who's our director who joined us last December, and they've been extremely supportive of the company. I mean, we've found ourselves in an incredibly fortunate and privileged position, having the backing of Bulo and his family behind us.
Their thesis is that they're going to let you run it. Are they going to have control of the board? Presumably, I mean, they've got control of the company. And what have they tasked you with? To find gold in Zimbabwe and copper in Botswana? I mean, is that the plan?
So that's the plan that we presented to them. We have an agreement in place with the Consagras. They're not seeking any board representation. So we have essentially a letter of understanding between the Consagras and the company. It's released as part of the circular, which describes the relationship. Everything that they've told us so far, they're treating this as an investment. They have a very large portfolio, a very varied portfolio of different investments that they've made. This is quite a big one for them, but by no means the largest. So they aren't seeking managerial control. They bought into the company and the business that we're building. Obviously, that will bring with it an extra degree of pressure to us. We know that we have to perform, but they're also extremely supportive of Peter. So we know that they are strong believers in Peter, and the fact that Peter joined our board last December, I think that ultimately was a deciding factor that increased their interest in the company, which led to the discussions we had in Q1, Q2 this year, which in turn led to the financing.
Does that mean that if this closes in the next couple of weeks, you will have about £5 million of treasury?
Slightly more than that, yeah.
And so that's enough to fund the work programs you've got in Botswana and Zimbabwe for 2024.
So this is all detailed in the prospectus. So yes, it is. Now, of course, as you know, Merlin, with any of these programs, if there is an opportunity to accelerate, so for example, if we hit good grades at our first drill campaign at our Hillside project in Zimbabwe, that might change things. If we hit good grades in our Kalahari Copperbelt drilling, that would actually be we're aiming to start in Q1 next year. And then that could certainly hit, that could change things. So obviously we'll be led by results from the field, but in terms of our plan as it stands today, yes, it does.
Well, Ben, Dave, thank you very much for your time. Good luck with closing the deal. Good luck with that drilling in Hillside, and I look forward to seeing what the new year brings in terms of geophysical results and drilling in Karakubis as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.